Well, John Gaffney is a professor of politics at Aston University and joins us now from London. There's so much to ask you, Professor. I actually don't really know where to begin, but clearly let's start by looking back a bit. This was a pretty bitter campaign. Do you get the impression there in the UK that now there's perhaps any sense of regret at all amongst people who might have voted for a Brexit of what the consequences are now that they're becoming very apparent and very real?
Well, possibly not yet, but it will happen. I'm sure it will happen. A lot of this vote was a kind of a protest vote, often voted for by people who they wanted. There was a kind of populist edge to it, anti-elitist, and decisions taken like that, often people rue the day. Also, the question of immigration played a very, very unsavoury role in this campaign, dividing people and possibly bringing out, some of the worst in our magnificent nation. I say magnificent nation, God knows how long we might remain one. From your excellent report there, I mean, well, it's funny that this referendum was supposed to answer one simple question, and it has generated 100 questions. And most of them, things have been happening very, very rapidly today with Cameron, with Corbyn, with Nicola Sturgeon and so on. But funnily enough, the irony is nobody actually knows where we're going. We don't know what we're doing economically, financially, politically, culturally, socially. We really are entering a period of uncertainty that we probably haven't known since World War II. This kind of the British narrative, our story, is changing direction dramatically. And I don't think people really realised, or even realise yet, how this is going to impact upon us all.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. I was just talking to someone earlier on saying that this Google search that's out there now in the UK, people asking, what is the European Union? It's one of the top search results, implying, as you say, people simply didn't make a very informed decision.
Yeah, that's certainly true, but it also underlies, while I was sitting in your green room, I saw that thing on the Google, and but it also underlies a certain kind of elite disdain for the people who voted out. I think they may have been wrong, but it was a democratic vote and so on. And a lot of them were very disaffected. And the reason why they were disaffected is they had a particular idea of Europe and a particular idea of how the elites see them. So this was a kind of a cry of anger or something like that. But the real fundamental problem here is that if these people didn't know what Europe was and they're now Googling it, why didn't they? Why have we spent the last 40 years, all the pro-Europeans, not actually explaining and valorising what the European Union brings to us? Because there is a sense in which everybody's done this. The French have done it. The Dutch have done it, we've done it. That is to say, we use the EU as a domestic political scapegoat instead of, so that when it comes to choosing, the real sort of sentiment in the country there isn't a sentiment for Europe. There should be, there should have been. The generation of the last 40 years should have been kind of nurturing the European ideal that it had at the very beginning. But instead, what we did was we pretended we were all going to be Eurosceptics, and, it slapped us around the face extremely hard now.
Yeah, and of course, worth pointing out, of course, that there are lots of different profiles of individual who have voted one way or the other, and I wasn't suggesting that everyone who voted out was ill-informed. But worth also just pointing out and looking forward as to what happens next, because you say this has generated so many questions, not least about who's going to run Britain. And this was all a big gamble by David Cameron and to a great extent by Boris Johnson, although he had less to lose. Although in his case, it's a gamble that's paid off. Does that, do you think, then make him the heir apparent? Do you think there is anyone else who really realistically has the profile to take on that mantle?
Well, he's certainly the favourite, but whether, we've seen strange things happen, and he is very much disliked by the MPs, his own MPs. He's the darling of the members. So there is a kind of a problem there. It's a similar problem that Corbyn faces, actually, in the Labour Party. And there are other possible people who might bring, if Conservatives feel that what they've got to do for the party is a process of healing, perhaps they might turn to somebody else like Theresa May or somebody else to try and heal the party. Boris is a popular but a divisive figure, so we will see. But yes, you're right, he certainly is the favourite at the moment. Another thing I would like to just briefly mention is that your excellent report demonstrated what this is doing, the damage this is causing to Ireland, Scotland, England relations and so on. It will also have dramatic political consequences upon the EU itself. I mean, an awful lot of people like Angela Merkel and François Hollande and others are putting on a brave face of it, but some of the kind of populist feeling in some of these countries, particularly France, Holland, Sweden and others, East Europe, but France particularly, it's much more sort of virulent, its populism, than our own. And therefore, you could find yourself with the EU itself unravelling because of this. And then we really are into uncharted territory.
Exactly. And just lastly, and we've briefly touched on Jeremy Corbyn's future already in this bulletin, but I just wanted to ask you specifically about Jeremy Corbyn. Do you think he is likely to survive? Because let's face it, even his staunchest supporters say that he simply wasn't audible or visible on the campaign trail.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see what happens. I mean, before this happened, he was even more popular amongst the rank and file than he had been when he was elected. So there is an issue there, but he was elected not really because he was left-wing, but because he kind of demonstrated a form of leadership image that the other candidates to the Labour leadership didn't demonstrate. He's now been seen to be wanting, and your hesitation about whether this might now lead to kind of dramatic consequences for the Corbyn leadership might actually be accurate.
OK, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much, Professor John Gaffney from Aston University. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us here on France 24.